Good evening, good evening. I'm gonna get straight into it, so just give me your time. Okay, I talked to you about the currency changing. 1971, we officially moved from the gold standard. What that simply means is we didn't barter for something physical anymore. We made up what we call fiat, the dollar bill that we use today, and the government decided what the price would be. So we just gave it a decree. This is what money is gonna be. That's it. We knew, ladies and gentlemen, we knew 700 years before we made this decision that it wasn't going to work. What I mean by that is Asia adopted the fiat system 700 years plus before America did. Nixon's team, there is no evidence that Nixon's team considered Chinese president despite Marco Polo's detailed accounts being available for 700 years plus. This means that we had citizens that were understanding that, hey, this system isn't going to work. Remember I told you they met at Camp David, what was supposed to be in secret, and made this change, not asking the citizens to weigh in on something that had 700 years worth of wisdom to tell us that might not be, well, forget that, it was not going to work. And what I mean by that is when China in 1260 to 1368, their currency depreciated 1,000% by 1309 and became worthless by 1368. Some of the same pressures that we dealt with, same fiscal pressures. Vietnam War costs for us, the Yuan military campaign for them. Printing money easier than raising taxes. Inflation, debt accumulation, and wealth inequality. This was 700 years before we even had this issue. What I'm trying to get you to understand is, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. This is just a system where citizens who are intelligent, who are trying to learn this and weigh in, don't have an avenue to say, maybe we could do something different if we had the availability and the authority to do something different. You will hear Black people say, hey, we were promised reparations. I'm here to tell you that it's not that we do not have the money. It's that you have to create a loan. The fiat system was the first thing that needed to be done. Was a loan was given. Debt needed to be created. Now we already have debt, but you needed a loan. We have to decide if the country needed to really decide if it wanted to create a loan for that. And it's not in the country's plan to do that. You know what else isn't in the country's plan? Giving up higher wages. Now you can print the money, but if you gave more wages, right? If people had more money and they didn't need to take loans, the system collapses. Because we need in our government system. I don't know why I don't know why the government isn't explaining this. I'm not going to blame this on teachers. I'm not going to blame this on the education system. I'm just not. Because the education system is meant to get you to work in this system. That's how it was working, right? We were producing jobs. You would come out of the job. You needed to take a loan if necessary, if you didn't come from wealth. And this is what bothers me the most, because this is why I'm running for governor. They did not. Wealthy people knew better. I'm not going to even believe for a second that the wealthy people did not know that they could take advantage, and I mean clear-cut take advantage of the fiat system. By way, this was, the fiat system always had a vulnerability to corruption, and I promise you the wealthy people knew it. And they knew that, hey, we can take advantage of this. They just didn't consider it. I don't think we had the technology. This is theory part. This isn't facts part. This is theory part. I don't think we had the technology to keep up with the data. When we first printed the first amount of money that brought us to where we are with this 30-something trillion dollars worth of debt, we knew the first amount we printed, but we were hand jamming that. We were writing that down. The math got too big too fast. Because what did we not consider? We didn't consider how devious people would be with capitalism and greed. So when they threw in counterfeit money, right? Remember, when I was growing up, they started like swiping your thing to make sure that the color didn't change, because they didn't consider how fast counterfeit money would happen, and not just from in America, even from outside. But other nations did, because this had already happened. So people knew the vulnerability. So did we. And so did the power structure in the United States of America. Power structure being the banks. Because the banks are the start of the fiat system. It's banks, then government, then citizens. So the banks knew, hey, if this happens, which it did 700 years before we adopted it, we just never leveraged. We chose not to leverage. And I'm saying we because we're all Americans, but the wealthy chose not to leverage in intellect of citizens. They chose to let the small, wealthy, voting minority do this. And we all know who makes up that class. So when you're wondering why you must be in debt, you needed to look up the fiat currency system and fully understand that it is a debt-based system, and that the numbers, if you really consider, they're saying that we don't need, that person tweeted out, I forget the congressman, tweeted out, let's get rid of 65 million people. Now, we heard that illegal immigrants were here paying money. This means that simple math would tell you that the amount that they were paying wasn't ever gonna be enough to put a dent in the system, in the debt. It wasn't gonna be enough. That's why you could just, hey, we don't need them anymore because we're never gonna get out of this. Do you understand that? I don't think this is theory based, because there's no way to prove this part. But data is seeming to go this direction. I do not believe that we have a plan, or that we were ever planning on paying off that debt. I think that when it started, I'm guessing that maybe they had good intentions, but I don't believe so. Maybe they had, but I don't believe so. If you knew 700 years prior that the currency system that you were about to adopt, you knew exactly what would cause the issues, and you went about that anyway, and you did it for your entire nation. You did it for your entire country. There are people who were smart enough to know this. I just wanted to bring the information because the positions that we want to be elected to, you have to know why we're going to do some of the things that we're going to do. Why I'm pushing to ensure that educated citizens, that progressive thinking citizens are in these seats. Because right now, there is something that we all know. If the computer doesn't sleep, if the computer is learning to do what humans can do, what do humans use to barter for goods in a system that you must pay to get something out of? That's why we do not hear a lot about how the numbers are. I don't know a good way to get you to lock into this. But I tell you one thing, we had better get in these conversations. They don't need to just be me talking to you and you agreeing. It needs to be, hey, this candidate needs to get in that seat to open up transparency to us, to give us a viable chance to back ideas that are going to work for the non-wealthy citizen. Because the wealthy knew, and this has been the wealthy, the secret, whatever you want to call them, this isn't no secret. Somebody knew exactly what they were doing. Marco Polo wrote this down. It didn't take me 100 years to realize this wasn't gonna work. I just needed to look, and I found a reason to look. Please consider your future. If you're looking, You have to take out loans. You must go into debt for this system to work. If you pay your way out of, if you've ever paid to a zero balance, I don't have any debt, man. Your credit score goes down. It doesn't just sit up high because you don't have any debt, because the system is based on debt. This isn't one of those, everybody knew that moment. Whoa. If you're wondering why we're having so many problems, why they keep inflating and inflating and inflating, it's because you need to take out loans. It's because look, I really believe that the powers that be, the ones who are very wealthy, they knew corruption was coming. There was no ifs, ands, and buts about it. They knew corruption was coming. They knew that it was vulnerable. And they took a chance on that. It's just population kept populating. And then technology popped in. And now you don't need as many population. So you have to look at changing the system. But who does that affect? The population, the human population. Because now, if I allow technology to do everything that you do, that got you the funds that allowed you to take in fiat, made up money, and put a value to it, and then now I don't need you for that. How do you work in this economy? I'm telling you, we need to be thinking about our futures. And you need to be at the table when we have those conversations. And the table is not waiting for the news. It's not waiting for the next TikTok. It's actually being able to vote on legislation that's going to mitigate the downfall. Because if you look at it, how long did it take? I just kept the notes. But from the year 1260 to 1368, that's how long China's fiat currency disaster was. 1260 to 1368. Lord help us all, because this is pretty interesting. That's 108 years. 108 years on that currency is all it took. 108 years. It is now 2025. It's 2025. I need you to understand that. Let me see this out. It is 2025, and we adopted this system in 1971. 54 years. 54 years, and we've already seen the inflation. Do not tell me they did not know. They being the government, because I'm always going to point it out. I always want you to know, when I say they or them, I want you to know I'm going to point out who I'm talking about. We, citizens, we didn't have a say-so. I, running for governor, trying to get you a say-so so we can get to the table, because we need, citizens, a progressive way to figure this one out. What are we going to do going into our future? And it cannot be reducing the population however people want to reduce it. That cannot be the answer, because sometimes that leads to the most atrocious things. So it cannot be reducing the population. We are smart enough to come up with a better system. Help me. Help us, please. If you need to look up what I'm talking about, if you just need to look it up, by all means, just ask, and I will post it to my Substack. But by all accounts, this is a big deal. And it's very interesting. And by this, if I said 54 years, if it took them 108 years, do the math. We're halfway there. We're halfway to zero out. So, there you have it. I hope you learned something. And please weigh in. Please weigh in. Everyone. This is so important. You guys have a great evening.